By me, Cowboy. The words were not a plea, but a low command, spoken by the most beautiful Apache woman he had ever seen. They cut through the market's din, meant for his ears alone. The marketplace of Red Hollow was a churning sea of noise and dust, a temporary settlement of greed and necessity. But all its chaos seemed to drain away, funneling toward the single, stark point of the wooden auction platform at its center. On those raised planks, she stood, barefoot, her feet dusty, but her posture unbroken. Even in captivity, she carried herself with a dignity that silenced the jeers in a man's heart before they could reach his lips. Her clothing was simple, a buckskin top tied at her waist, and a skirt that fell just above her knees, both garments worn but clean. Her dark hair was a loose cascade over her shoulders, a veil that did nothing to dim the fierce, intelligent light in her eyes. Behind her, a rough sawn board bore the words for sale. The letters burned into the wood as if to sear the concept into her very soul. The men below did not see a soul. They saw livestock. Their eyes, laden with hunger, mockery, and a casual sense of ownership, scraped over her. And she endured it, her stillness a silent rebellion, a weapon of will that none of them possessed. Among them stood a rancher. His hat was weathered, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms corded with the muscle of a man who worked the earth. He had not come here for this. He had followed the noise out of a fleeting curiosity, but the moment his gaze found her, his boots felt rooted to the spot. His eyes lingered, not with the lust of the other men, but with a profound confusion. How could a spirit remain so defiantly unshaken in a place designed to break it? The auctioneer slapped the wooden frame, his voice a grating shout about strength, labor, and obedience. Numbers began to fly, a volley of coins and crude shouts as men tried to outbid each other in a contest of wealth and moral poverty. The rancher remained silent, his gaze fixed on her. It was a look she had not encountered in days, devoid of judgment, free of the intent to claim. It was simply observation. She felt it, even with her chin lowered in a show of defiance. And when a nearby man made a coarsely explicit remark, followed by a bid meant to humiliate, she flinched. The reaction was microscopic, a tiny crack in her granite composure that no one saw, except for the silent man. That single, vulnerable tremor pulled something tight inside his chest. She raised her eyes then, meeting his. He didn't look away. He didn't leer. He simply looked back, as if trying to decipher a complex text. Something in that steady, honest gaze compelled her. She took a single step forward on the platform, leaning just enough that her shadow stretched toward him. The crowd continued to roar, the auctioneer continued to brag, but in the small space between her and the quiet rancher, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but crystalline, carrying perfectly to him through the noise. By me, Cowboy. The words held no begging tone. They were strategy. They were urgency. They were a flicker of trust, offered like a high-stakes gamble. His expression froze, stunned not by the request, but by the sharp authority wrapped within it. She leaned infinitesimally closer, her eyes locking with his. By me, she repeated, her voice low and firm. Before one of them does. In that instant, her face revealed everything she usually hid, a terrifying blend of fear and iron determination, a profound strength desperately disguising a bottomless desperation. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was strategically choosing the only man who looked capable of not destroying what little was left of her. The rancher's breath caught in his throat. Some deep, instinctual part of him understood. If he stepped back now, another man would step forward, and the life in her eyes would be extinguished forever. Before the auctioneer could drop the hammer on the latest crude bid, the quiet man's voice cut through the air. He shouted a number, a figure, so high it made the crowd gasp. The auctioneer's eyes widened, his mouth falling open for a second before he slammed the hammer down. Sold. A murmur of resentment and disappointment rippled through the crowd, but the rancher was already moving, his attention solely on her. As she descended from the platform with the same controlled grace she had maintained throughout the ordeal, he did not reach for her arm. He did not guide her like property. He simply stepped aside, giving her space, offering a respect that was as foreign to this place as she was. She fell into step beside him, not out of obedience, but because she had chosen him over the wolves. For a long moment they walked in silence. He could feel her studying him, her gaze a physical weight, measuring his every movement, weighing the risk of her gamble. He didn't speak. He didn't ask her name. He didn't justify what he had done. He just kept walking, leading her away from the platform, from the men who would have torn her spirit to pieces. And in the resonant silence between them, she sensed something she had not felt since the world turned cruel. Possibility. Their fates had collided at the edge of a wooden platform. And now, walking side by side into an uncertain future, they both understood that what came next would not be easy, simple, or safe. But it would be theirs to face together. When they left the marketplace behind, the noise faded into a dull murmur, but the weight of their choices settled between them, a dense and unspoken presence. The rancher's steps were measured, and she matched his pace, a silent partner in this sudden, shared flight. He stopped and turned to her. Without a word, his hands went to the coarse rope still looped around her wrist. His fingers, strong and scarred from a life of labor, worked at the knot with a surprising gentleness. It was a careful, deliberate act, unlike the harsh, grabbing hands that had bound her in the first place. She watched him, her expression guarded, her curiosity piqued by this first, tangible test of his character. When the rope fell away, coiling into the dust at their feet, she looked at him. It was not a look of gratitude, but one of sharp, analytical assessment. She was deciding whether to trust. He didn't wait for thanks he knew wouldn't come. He simply nodded toward the outskirts of town where the buildings gave way to open land, and began walking again. She followed, falling into step beside him as an equal. After a long stretch of silence, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the hard-packed earth, she finally spoke. "You didn't hesitate back there." He glanced at her. "When you told me to buy you." She nodded. Most men would have questioned it. Laughed, maybe. He considered his words, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Most men weren't the reason you said it." Her lips twitched, the faintest ghost of approval. "You noticed why I chose you?" "I noticed enough," he said, the memory of her concealed flinch sharp in his mind. She turned her gaze forward, her profile stern against the vast sky. Right choices cost more than people expect. He let out a short, dry breath, almost a smirk. "I paid enough to learn that." When they reached his horse, a sturdy bay tied at the edge of town, she stopped abruptly. Her eyes scanned the horizon, not with wonder, but with the practiced sweep of a hunter, or prey. "The men who captured me," she said, her tone shifting, becoming edged and dangerous. "They weren't hunting for reward. They were working for someone." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Someone who wants me returned." He stiffened. "Why?" She hesitated, the internal struggle between silence and trust playing out in the tight line of her jaw. Finally, the words came, low and bitter. "Because I ran from the life forced on me. From a man who claims me as his because of some tradition he twisted to serve himself." Her jaw clenched. "He won't accept my escape." The rancher felt a heat rise in his chest, a slow-burning anger directed at the faceless man who believed he could own such a spirit. "So they'll follow us?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes still on the hills. "Yes. And now they'll believe you took what they think is theirs." He waited for fear to surface in her eyes, but it never did. The only emotion she carried was a cold, hardened readiness. "If they come," he said, his voice steady, "we'll deal with them." Her eyes widened a fraction, a flicker of surprise that he would align himself with her cause so unequivocally. "You don't know what kind of trouble that brings." "Doesn't matter," he said. "You asked for help. I gave it." She searched his face, her gaze probing for the hidden motive, the selfish angle that was always there. Finding none, the rigid line of her shoulders softened, if only for a heartbeat. They rode together to his ranch. She didn't cling or lean into him. She sat with the perfect, innate balance of someone who had learned to survive on unsteady ground. When they arrived, she dismounted before he could offer a hand, her eyes immediately cataloging the land, mapping escape routes and defensive angles with a warrior's instinct. "Quiet place," she observed, her voice low. "Too quiet for what follows me." "Then we'll be ready," he replied. She turned to him, testing him with a slow, penetrating stare. "You and me." "If you stay," he said. Her eyes narrowed, not in rejection, but in deep consideration. After a long moment, she gave a single, decisive nod. "For now, I stay." Inside the cabin, she examined the space without touching a thing. Her eyes traced every corner, every piece of simple, sturdy furniture, memorizing the terrain of her new sanctuary, or her next battlefield. The rancher watched her silently, understanding that every breath she took, every movement, was honed by survival. Later, she sat outside on the porch steps, sharpening a thin, deadly blade she had produced from a hidden sheath in her boot. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was the only sound, sparks flickering like tiny, angry stars in the gathering dusk. The rancher joined her, careful to leave a respectful space between them. "Those men," he said. "How soon will they come?" She didn't pause her work. "Soon enough." He absorbed the finality of her answer, feeling the air shift around them. This was no longer about the past. It was about preparation. She finally lifted her gaze from the blade, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that felt like an anchor. "When I told you to buy me," she said quietly, "I didn't know if you'd help me or hand me back." "And now?" he asked. She looked past him, toward the distant hills where the long shadows were beginning to merge into one solid darkness. "Now I see you stand by your choices." She rose, sliding the newly sharpened blade back into its hidden sheath in her boot. The motion was fluid, practiced, final. "Good," she said, her voice low and steady as her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Because they're coming." He stood and moved to her side, his own posture squaring to the threat. Together, they faced the vast expanse as dark shapes began to separate from the shadows of the distant hills. The figures advanced not with a rush, but with a slow, certain intent, like a storm front gathering its strength. She glanced at him, a fleeting look that carried the weight of their entire shared history, from the auction block to this moment. Then she repeated the words that had first bound their futures together, the command that had started it all. "You bought me, cowboy." This time, the words held no trace of the desperate gamble from the marketplace. They were stripped bare, containing only a profound and simple truth. They were a promise of her alliance, and a warning of the price it carried. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away from the approaching figures. He simply nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. "And I'll stand by that choice." Side by side, the rancher and the Apache woman stood their ground, waiting for the trouble that hunted her, the trouble that was now irrevocably theirs to face together.